Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone who is joining us. We are live on the Women Who Lift Israel with a special guest, Jen Curtis. Thank you so much, Jen, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, to intro everyone, first of all, my name is Sarah Yaluz. I'm one of the co-founders of Women Who Lift Israel. We are a women-only Facebook community focused on empowering other women through strength training. And we started these live interviews here because we wanted to be able to give all the women in our community plenty of inspiration and motivation and advice from all of our experts. And today we have Jen with us. We are so honored for you to join us today, Jen. I'm one of your fans.
Yay, I'm excited to be here.
Jen is a certified fitness instructor specializing in training women throughout all stages of pregnancy and post-pregnancy. So, Jen, I know about you, but maybe for the people who doesn't know you yet in our community, can you give a little bit of an introduction about yourself, where you're from? When did you first become interested in fitness, and when was the first time you actually lifted a barbell or a dumbbell?
Cool. So I grew up just west of London in Berkshire, in a little village. I grew up playing in England. I grew up playing lots and lots of sports. I was a big tomboy. I played a lot of boys' sports like rugby, cricket, netball as well. All very English sports. But it was lots and lots of like team sports, running around, lots of cardio, but never any sort of strength training. And then I did the usual thing, studies took over, university, and I just stopped everything, going to uni in the UK, lots of drinking, over the years, moved into an office job. And it was only when I was like 24 that I decided to start exercising again. And I actually started with running. Somehow I ended up in a strength training for runners class, and that started getting me interested. Then I ended up, I can't remember how I had the inclination, but I ended up in doing my own thing, kind of like in those outdoor gym places, like training to do pull-ups and push-ups. And I was just doing squats and lunges at that point. And I just I got into the idea of going and lifting weights. And I remember going to my local gym and just putting 50 kilos on a bar and just trying to squat it, like with no warmth or anything. I made mistakes, did everything wrong right from the beginning, got really into it and got myself really injured in the process. Ended up going to like CrossFit style things. Then I became a trainer and started learning what I actually needed to do.
Good. And how did you get into the pregnancy and postpartum kind of?
Well, I think after you finish at Wingate or doing any kind of course like that, you kind of leave feeling like you just know. You just know what you don't know. Like you feel like you don't know anything. So I decided I needed to keep learning. So I figured I didn't know what to do, and I figured like, well, at some point this is going to be helpful for me. I'm sure I'll have a baby at some point. So I started doing that. I actually, in the process, discovered that I had a hypertonic pelvic floor, which I started treating, and that started getting me really interested in that area of like women's health. And also the course was just like, I did it here in Israel, and it was just a load of crap. It was just so outdated. It was like 1980s, like sitting on a fit ball, waving your arms around. And at this point I was throwing barbells around and stuff, and I was not impressed. And I was like, and they still teach, what they taught in the 1980s. So I was like, there's got to be more to it than this, like, and so I went on a bit of a mission to learn more about, how to do what I like doing, and what is resistance training, like it or not, it's not just a fad. It's like part of a well-structured exercise program. So and it gets fantastic results for women and men alike. So I wanted to learn more about how to do that in the the pregnancy and postpartum chapter, and then I went on a big mission to do that through lots of courses and online courses like that.
Got it. And okay, so most of our questions are around pregnancy because we need, you know, to get all this info out for you from you.
Totally. There's not many people around to answer the questions, especially not with weight during pregnancy.
Exactly, and it's so like interesting to me. So first of all, like when I got pregnant, basically everyone around me told me like, don't do anything, stop working out, like, and I know this is not really like so accurate anymore. So I'm really interested of having this conversation with you. So is it safe to lift while pregnant? What rules should be followed in order not to injure yourself and most importantly your baby? And specifically, is there like a list of exercise we should absolutely not attempt during pregnancy?
Okay, so really good question. First of all, totally contraindicated exercises include things like scuba diving, contact sports, things where you're going to get smacked in the belly or fall. Jumping out of planes is not advised. You know, they're the things that are just on the avoid list.
I need to give up basketball. You're saying no basketball.
Well, if you're elbowing each other and like, you know, full contact. I think most women, when they get pregnant, they kind of don't want people touching them anyway. I was doing a lot of jiu-jitsu before pregnancy, and I thought I'd carry on through my first trimester, but then I was just like, you don't touch me, like. So that kind of ended. In terms of in terms of is lifting weights safe for you and your baby? It's not only safe, it's also beneficial and it's recommended. So there are big sort of government and international guidelines that you know, lots of research is being done on exercise during pregnancy now, and there are big, you know, the CDC, the NHS in the UK. ACOG, which is all about obstetrics and gynecology, they all do big kind of meta-analyses every year and update the guidelines on what is safe and what's not safe, and what we can do during pregnancy. And if you look at a timeline of it, every year it gets more and more permissive. So now guidelines for exercise during pregnancy are exactly the same as guidelines for every other chapter of life. 2 sessions of resistance training, 150 minutes accumulated over the week of moderate cardiovascular exercise. So yeah, it's not only safe, it's also beneficial. It's really important to make a differentiation between what's safe for baby and what's safe for mum. We're often very worried about what's safe for baby, and as we should be, but actually more research has shown that even quite intense exercise, it's quite hard to find something that's, you know, that's not safe for the baby. We do want to moderate, like not go into extremes with heart rate and weights and extreme exercise and exhaustion and getting too hot, and, you know, we want to be hydrated and things like that. But even things that are safe for the baby, so lifting very heavy weights, for example, might not be the best thing for mum because of pelvic floor and things like that. Having said that, what I like to sort of get everyone to keep in mind is that it's not like you get pregnant and then there's just things, everything, you have to stop doing certain things. I mean, apart from like rugby and scuba diving and stuff, it's like it's a continuum. You have to think of it as a continuum, because like as the changes, you know, as more changes happen and as you start to get a belly, there's certain things that you just can't do. You know, if you are into Olympic lifting, you know, apart from the fact that if you're any good, you won't want to mess up your bar path. But
right, exactly.
There is a chance of like, you know, hitting yourself in the belly. So it's just not worth the risk. You know, you could switch to dumbbells though, and do some like dumbbell clean and presses and snatches. So, and likewise with like push-ups, you know, when you have a belly, you just can't lie on the floor the belly gets in the way. So, but there's no reason why you can't do incline push-ups. So my big rule of thumb is modify before you admit. So instead of saying, right, stop doing it altogether, like change it first. And I just want to say that when it comes to lifting weights, a really good rule of thumb, I know we're taught to brace and hold our breath, but really good, the current guidelines during pregnancy are to exhale through the effort. So you want to be breathing through the movement. You don't want to be holding your breath in, which will reduce the weights that you can lift. And that keeps it at a safe level for your pelvic floor, prevents too much intra-abdominal pressure, too much demand on the pelvic floor. And so, you know, if you were squatting, you know, 120 kilos before getting pregnant, you might increase the rep range and breathe out through the movement. And then that's automatically going to reduce the weights that you can lift. And that will probably continue to like lessen throughout pregnancy.
It's really interesting what you said about like having space for your movement. I even sometimes when I attempt snatches with like, you know, a barbell, even like my boobs get in the way sometimes. So it's like a belly would totally like get in the way. I never thought of that. Like
totally.
Technically, like you need to like take care of mommy and baby, like with your
another
movement.
one that people often don't think about is things like if you CrossFit, things like wall balls, because you could miss and it fall on your belly, and it's just not, you know.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
It's not good to be chucking a 5 kilo, 10 kilo weight over your head. Like,
right, but if we're talking about like the deadlifts or like the back squats, like adding like weights to these exercises, like okay.
Again, it's like about your level of strength. So rather than arbitrary numbers, like don't lift more than 11 kilos or something, you know, you want to lift something that you can lift for 10 reps with a couple of reps left in the tank, and while also exhaling through the movement. So, you know, a power lifter might then suddenly reduce her weights to 50 kilos for 10 reps. But somebody who's brand new to strength training, never done it before, and wants to start in her first trimester, that happens sometimes, she might just start with air squats. You know, it's completely modifiable. That's what's so great about strength training, and that's one of the messages that I try and get across, is that there's so many modifications you can make for the pregnancy chapter and postpartum chapter. You can change body position. You can do anything from 1 kilo to like 150 kilos. You know, you can completely like modify it to the abilities of the woman in front of you.
Right, it depends where you started from, actually.
Right.
And what about running? Is it the same thing? Can you run throughout pregnancy? Is there different like stages of pregnancy you should like avoid running, or the same?
Running is kind of similar to lifting weights in the it's like, you know, technically it's fine, but then there's practical things that get in the way. Usually so there's two things I like to talk about. One is when you start getting a belly and there's lots of weight on the pelvic floor and lots of weight on your joints. You know, you've got to remember, when you run, 3 times your weight goes through your joints and your pelvic floor. And right now, all of those joints are getting a little bit more loosey-goosey. So you are more prone to injury than you were before pregnancy. That usually happens like somewhere in the 2nd trimester. There's no need to stop. I mean, you do start having changes to your connective tissue early on in pregnancy, but the changes in weight and whatever, it means you don't usually need to stop. But also the pressure on the pelvic floor and the hips. Most women have some leaking during pregnancy, and running aggravates that. A lot of women feel heaviness, and we are worried about the risk of prolapse during pregnancy. Hip pain, knee pain. Usually, you know, when you're carrying 10 kilos extra and jumping up and down, it's hard. And most women find, I mean, I get a lot of women who sort of say, is it okay to keep running? And I'm like, I'm 25 weeks. And I'll be like, how do you feel when you're running? They're like, well, my knees hurt and my hips hurt. Well, so no,
better not.
And most women will find they'll have to stop running at some point. But again, modify before you admit. Like, do you need to start walking first? Like, maybe you go for a half-hour walk and you do some very short intervals of running. Maybe it's about, you know, lowering it down gently. The other big change that I want to talk about is in your first trimester from conception, so the moment that you're pregnant, before you even know you're pregnant, there are massive changes happening to your cardiovascular system. So without going into all the to getting too technical, it's a phenomenon called underfill. Most women aren't aware of this at all. So what happens is all your the hormonal changes cause all your smooth muscle to relax. So you have got a lot of smooth muscle in your blood vessels. So that causes a lot of your blood vessels to dilate. So suddenly you go from having 4 liters of space in your cardiovascular system to 6 liters of space, but you still only have 4 liters of blood. So blood pressure plummets, and then your heart rate goes up to compensate. So your resting heart rate will go up by about 10 beats per minute. And then when you start exercising, it shoots up. So I've continued, I'm 11 weeks now, and I've continued running throughout my first trimester, and I only have to run for about 3 minutes and my heart rate's up at 165 beats per minute. And that was happening very, very, very like week 2. It doesn't mean you have to stop running. It just, I've already switched to run walking because it's just about keeping your heart rate in a manageable level. So I keep going for half an hour, and I just run when I start walking when my heart rate gets high, and then I start running again when my heart rate comes back down. And what we used to say 140 beats per minute, that's very outdated now. Now what we say is to do the talk test. You should be able to talk but not sing. So if you can continue talking, once you start getting really panty and out of breath, that's when you start walking and bringing it back down. But if you can sing, you're probably not working hard enough.
I already could barely talk when I'm running, and I'm not pregnant yet, so maybe I should slow down. Actually, I think I wasn't going to ask you this question, but I feel I need a 101 on like pelvic floor. Like, what is the pelvic floor of a woman, and how is it affected like during pregnancy? Like what you have? Yeah, I need a one-on-one on that.
yeah, good question. So pelvic floor, you've got your pelvis, right, which is like a bowl shape, and you've got a massive hole in the middle of that bone, right? That solid bone. It's actually 2 halves that are connected together, and that hole at the bottom has a group of muscles that have lots of fascia and connective tissue in between, right? And in that, so it's like a hammock in the bottom of your pelvis, and all your abdominal organs sit on that, right? It's part of your core system. So you have your pelvic floor at the bottom, your diaphragm at the top, and then the abdominal muscles that wrap around. So it's like a Coke can, and it's a closed pressure system. You got 3 holes in your pelvic floor, where the one you pee out of, the vagina where you push the baby out of, and the bum hole. Yeah. And then easier to not use technical terms. As your pregnancy progresses, you got to remember most of the weight is focused on that part of the system. The abdominal muscles are weakened, so often the pelvic floor is doing more of the work. And if you've had a previous birth, previous vaginal birth, you would have pushed a baby through that quite small hole. So you might have had tears, or you just would have stretched that hole out. So there can be changes there's changes to the tissue in birth, but during the pregnancy chapter, there are a lot of changes happening as weight increases on the pelvic floor, and postural changes and other things like that. But that's the most important change.
Got it. Thank you. I needed that. And so what about after giving birth? How long should we wait before being able to weight lift, or should we wait at all? And is there a difference between like a natural birth and a C-section birth? What have you seen with your clients?
Okay, so first part of the question first. When you can start lifting again. So you'll get the green light from your doctor if nothing's wrong at 6-week mark. And you shouldn't do any formal exercise before then, mainly because of medical reasons. You know, you could bleed out. Like, even if you feel up to it, you might not be all, you know, healed inside. But there are a lot of things you can do in those early 6 weeks to help, like, start to recover and things like that. But anyway, that wasn't what you asked. So the doctor usually says, yep, you can go back to doing everything: running, jumping, lifting weights. That's not quite the full story. I like to think of, say, like the pregnancy chapter. Let's say if you're lifting weights as a kind of diminuendo, you know, you can start wherever you start, but you're probably going to have to decrease the weights as you go. And then when you start exercising postpartum, you have to remember birth is a massive sort of trauma to the body, no matter which way you spin it. When you start exercising again around that 6-week mark, it should be a crescendo. So rather than just like boom, starting back up, I can tell you I had an emergency C-section with my son. And I was very strong, and I know, you know, what I'm doing. I should know what I'm doing anyway. When I started my first kind of strength workouts again around that 6-week mark, I started a bit before because like, it's my body and I can. But I started with a 4-kilo dumbbell. I did 4-kilo rows, 4-kilo floor press. My core was very, very weak, so that doubled up as a really nice core exercise, but it wasn't too much on my abdominal muscles. I did 2 sets of 10 air squats, and I was really sore from that. And I did Romanian deadlifts, I think with 4 kilos in each hand. So, and it was a short workout. I think it was about 15 minutes. And that, in my opinion, is how postpartum exercise should start. No matter how amazing you were or strong you were before. But, you know, if anyone who knows anything about strength training knows about progressive overload, and that's really important. It doesn't matter where you start. Realistically, it is going to take you 6 to 12 months to get back to pre-pregnancy levels, more like 12 months for most women. And it's about gradually increasing the weights and increasing the difficulty, increasing the length of your workouts. I'd recommend starting with, say, 10 minutes 3 times a week at that 6-week mark, and just gradually increasing it and increasing the weights. I increased a kilo every workout until and stopped when I couldn't do any more. But you quickly go back up to pre-pregnancy levels. There are different considerations for C-section versus a vaginal birth that you have to witness. In particular, with a vaginal birth, our biggest concern is causing prolapse. The pelvic floor is very, very weak, even if you had a great birth. The uterus goes from being 100 grams when we're not pregnant. By the end of pregnancy, it's over a kilo, not including all of the weight. And it takes time for that to shrink down. And often the ligaments holding it up get weakened during the birth. So there's a lot of weight on the pelvic floor that is weaker. So we don't want to put too much demand on the pelvic floor initially. So we want to do a lot more exercises that aren't high demand on the pelvic floor, stuff like, you know, hip thrusts, for example. Romanian deadlifts are much less demand on the pelvic floor than squats. Things like that, but gradually increase, like the same principle of progressive overload. We're increasing the demand on the pelvic floor as it gets stronger, rather than just all of a sudden putting a ton of weight and demand on it. Whereas with a C-section, potentially it will take you longer to be able to lift the kinds of weights that you lifted before, because you had quite serious abdominal surgery. But you might not have to be quite so mindful of demand on the pelvic floor. You'll be more mindful of demand on your C-section scar. So anything that's front-loaded, for example, is going to be difficult. So like a push-up is quite a difficult position to be. Again, you can start with incline push-ups or a plank position. There's a lot of demand on those abdominal muscles. So we'll start with a lot of supine exercises. you can definitely, the goal is to get back to all of those things. It just doesn't start there.
It will take time.
And also anything where you're stretched out, like, you know, pull-ups, for example, there's so much demand on the abdominal muscles during a pull-up. You'll really want to work gradually back towards that. It'll be a while before you feel like you can hang and be stretched out.
So talking about C-sections, I've had a question I wanted to ask for a while, and I personally have been scared to ask, but I'll go for it anyways. So I personally had like a C-section with my first and only child, and I really felt like C-sections are kind of like underrated because like all of the pelvic floor issues that women talk about are essentially, I think, non-existent if you have C-section births. Am I correct?
For the most part, yeah. I think this is one of the topics where I feel like I feel like I get myself in trouble with a lot. I don't know if you do follow me online. I tend to pick some of the more controversial topics, but also logic and reason doesn't always hold up in the mummy communities and around birth and things like that. Kind of other narratives take over. So, I'll just go for the answer as well.
Well, my question is basically like take into account a woman's like overall health years after giving birth, like not only the few months after they have given birth. Like, do you still think that giving birth like naturally like is easiest on the body, or not so?
I'm a big fan of nuance and a big fan of like two different things can be true at the same time. And people love black and white and they love to be on team this or team that. But just for some like background information as well, I thought that a C-section was like the end of the world. I was like, very geared up for a natural birth. I didn't want any intervention, any epidural. I was actually planning a home birth.
Wow.
I ended up with an emergency C-section at 42 weeks and, the medical system saving my ass. So I've got a 180 since then, but it can be easy to get wrapped up in our confirmation biases and our own experiences around this. I think it's really important to remember that there's a list of pros and cons for both. C-section, actually, from what I understand, and also I'm not a surgeon, depending on which expert you ask about, if you ask a midwife or Ina May Gaskin, you're going to get one answer. If you ask a surgeon, you're going to get a different one. So I don't claim to have like the one answer here, but I do think I can see some of the nuance that not everyone talks about. C-sections often transfer the risk from the baby to the mother. There's more risk for the mother than for the baby, risk of infection or risk of, sometimes something gets nicked with the scalpel that can cause complications. Women who have multiple C-sections can sometimes have issues with the scar tissue. Some of that can be mitigated by doing C-section scar tissue massage, and breathing exercises and things like that postpartum. Or there's like obstructed bowel syndrome and things like that can happen later on down the line. So it's not that C-sections are completely risk-free. But vaginal birth can be such a mixed bag as well. I mean, some women have unicorn births, short labors, no tearing, no interventions whatsoever. And then other women end up needing a whole bunch of interventions, like having a vacuum delivery or a forceps delivery. I've heard, I work with women day in, day out, and the recovery from that isn't any easier. Or, if you do have some women have a really severe tear that can go through, they go through quite a few layers of muscle, and that can cause really severe problems. Or some women post vaginal delivery have pelvic organ prolapse, which can be very, very severe. So you can't guarantee which kind of vaginal birth you're going to get. A lot of that is due to genetics and as well as, what you do. It's not all in our control. I'd say if I could go into a vaginal birth guaranteed that I'm going to get like, you know, the unicorn birth, then yeah, I think that's probably the best outcome for everyone. But like, there are involved in a vaginal birth as well. It's not all. And yeah, I do think that, you know, post C-section, you don't have a lot of the pelvic floor problems that you do post vaginal birth, but there is potential for other problems as well. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that there's it's a mixed bag, and you know, you don't know what you're going to get. So
yeah, a lot of times I'm like just sitting with like groups of mommies that are discussing like horrible like pelvic floor issues that I have like no idea what they're talking about, because I got an emergency C-section without even, you know, having contractions whatsoever. So it was just like, it felt so like easy, like, okay, let's do an operation, taking your baby out. It's closed now, go, you know, like I didn't have any like issues later on with any abdominal problems or pelvic floor issues. So, but I get what you're saying, that like there are some risks as well, and like there's like scary and good sides from both both
I do feel the same as you though, often with conversations around pelvic floor. I do feel like I got off light in many ways. I think the recovery was hard, but like apart from having a scar that I can see, but it's quite faint, like I don't feel like my body's any different now to before I had a C-section, and I think it's really hard to live with pelvic floor problems. You know, if you're leaking, or if you have prolapse, and it's not a little thing. It can really affect women's lives. It's not a joke.
Yeah, I had like a few women in my running group that just like stopped running after such an amount of like kilometers, because they felt like their whole like downstairs were gonna drop or whatever. Like, and you know, it's like sad that they like lived years after giving birth with that problem.
Yeah.
So we want to bring awareness to the health benefits of having muscles on a woman's body. We know that research has shown that maintaining muscle mass like helps increase your lifespan and live a better quality of life with better mobility. What are some of the physical like benefits you see in pregnant women or postpartum clients that include strength training in their lifestyle?
So I think the biggest thing, because like I'm a big fan of resistance training for aesthetic reasons as well, but I think the big thing that we need to remember is function, and that's the biggest thing that people feel in their pregnancy and the postpartum period. You know, just because you're pregnant, shit doesn't get lighter. Like your child doesn't get lighter. Your laundry basket doesn't get lighter. The shopping you have to lift up doesn't get lighter. Life doesn't get lighter. You still have to do these things. And when you're stronger, those things are easier. When you maintain muscle mass, when you maintain, when you maintain strength through range of motion, things are easier. Life is easier. It's less tiring. So that's the big thing. I've had clients who've come to me in a second pregnancy, and by the end of their pregnancy they're like, you know, I feel so much stronger than I did in my first.
Wow.
Because you know, you are going to lose strength and muscle mass. It's pretty much guaranteed, even if you do strength train. So like mitigating that and maintaining adequate levels of strength to be able to cope with the demands of your daily life. Also just pregnancy, like I was like 15 kilos heavier by the end of my pregnancy, and that's all just going out in front of me. And that's like not a large amount of weight gain either, but it's all on your back. Your back's taking the brunt of all of that, because it's just, imagine holding a heavy weight out in front of you. That's all your back that's carrying that. That's your scaffolding. So women are obsessed with core training during pregnancy as well, but actually you really need to strengthen your back and your bum, because that's what's holding the whole system up.
That's so interesting.
What's that?
That's so interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah, most women don't, but that's literally what's holding the whole structure up, and that's what's holding that weight out in front of you. So women who continue doing deadlifts and squats and things like that, modifying it, being, you know, adjusting the weight if they need to reduce the weight during their pregnancy, doing so, being sensible about it in that way, but like you know, keeping the body strong. It also, most women who do, you know, sensible strength training, because, you know, you get the crazy women as well who keep lifting, like, you know, their 5-rep max the day before they go into birth. Like, that's not what I'm talking about here. But like when you're doing sensible resistance training, you also reduce aches and pains. I do a lot of women, as we get later in pregnancy, we switch to we keep doing the squats and deadlifts, but we do a lot of like upper body, like bodybuilder style stuff, because you can maintain a lot of, like, you know, a nice bit of shoulder boulder and stuff like that, and look, you know, keep holding a lot of muscle mass up there without affecting, you know, the pregnancy too much or at all. And so, you know, they get that aesthetic benefits of it as well. It helps you maintain a healthy weight throughout your pregnancy and throughout the childbearing years. You've got to remember, most of us will have more than one child. It's not just about getting through it once. It's about, you know, it's about maintaining health over a decade sometimes. And also things like blood sugar levels. I mean, any exercise helps you maintain good blood sugar levels. Obviously, our blood sugar levels get more, they're harder for the body to regulate during pregnancy, and a lot of us will end up with gestational diabetes. So, you know, maintaining muscle mass in general will help you regulate blood sugar levels, but specifically doing the workouts, I mean, cardiovascular exercise and lifting weights, you know, help with that. I had one trainee who would always time after her workout, she'd go and have a shake, because that was the only day she could get that many carbs in, like, because it would affect her blood sugar levels. So it can give you more wiggle room with your diet if you do have GD, and can help you maintain healthy blood sugar levels.
And what about like mental strength? Like, have you seen any mental changes in your trainees after they started like weight training?
Yeah.
For example, like for myself, I started becoming like more of a badass, more confident, and, you know, like really proud of myself. Like, do you see the same in your clients?
Definitely. I think, like, learning how to lift heavy stuff and put it back down again, it sounds so like it's got such a meathead kind of reputation, but it develops this kind of mental fortitude that does just spill over into other areas of your life, and you sort of realize how much you can do, and it can be a great feeling to lift more than a guy at the gym, or like or to be that, you know, amongst your friends, the one that they think's a bit crazy to lift weights. But what I've seen with, like, a lot of my in particular with the postpartum clients, I used to, for years, I ran group classes at CrossFit Tel Aviv for like pregnant and postpartum women, and there were specifically strength training classes for that chapter of our lives. And the big thing that I noticed with my trainees, you know, everyone comes to lose weight and to look better and to feel better and all of that stuff, and that's fine. I fully support those goals. But what I noticed is that they would come with those goals, but then what kept them there was the fact that they were working towards their first pull-up, or working towards doing push-ups, or working towards lifting a barbell, you know, like lifting like getting a heavy deadlift. Some women are particularly good at that, and then they sort of go off on that one. And like and their reason they went from, like, you know, the first few sessions is like, you know, I want to like burn calories and lose weight, but then the reason why they're there a year later is like, because I want to get, you know, I want to get 5 pull-ups now. And their body changes when you make those changes, but the confidence that you get from learning how to do those things, and realizing that you're able to do those things, you can train the body to do those things, is just amazing.
That actually like happened to me as well. Like, I stopped like looking at the scale once after being in CrossFit and like how much I was losing, and more like looking at my performance. Like, I even had like bariatric surgery. Like, I lost a lot of weight. I had surgery to lose weight, and I got like interviewed in a podcast recently where he talked about like weight loss successes, and he asked me like, so how much weight did you lose? And I literally like really didn't know how to answer that. I haven't looked at the scale in such a long time, and I was in awe, because like it used to be me like so much. I would wake up and just like look at the scale every single day. And now that I'm in CrossFit, like what you described, like all I want is like more like weight on my squat, or like to finally like be able to do a stand up or like a pull up or like that's my goals now, and it's so amazing.
And like I always say, like, I fully support anyone who has weight loss goals, but the body is more than that. Like, it's more than just like what you weigh or what you look like. And I think discovering that, I mean, those strength goals can really help play into those aesthetic goals, but discovering that you're able to do things and that you're strong is really special, and it's a real experience that people go away with and think about and feel really good about themselves. And there's not all that many things in life that make us feel really good about ourselves. Like, it's nice to have something that does lift you up and rather than a lot of fitness classes as well just make you feel like shit, you know, just like you're not good enough, you're not fit enough, if someone else is fitter, someone else is skinnier, and showing up to a place where you're actually just you know, every time you show up you're better. That's that's cool.
So we have like a question from the Kahal from Yotam. Not a woman, but still a fan. I was wondering, can exercising during a pregnancy reduce the need to stay away from certain foods that are not normally allowed during pregnancy?
Interesting question. So there are foods that are like contraindicated during pregnancy. I think things like you know, like raw meat or eggs, certain types of fish, and unwashed vegetables, sprouts is often a surprising one. Things that can have, like, our immune system is lowered. We're more prone to infection or to you know, getting a bacterial infection and things like that. And the ones that are dangerous to the baby are the ones that we're most worried about. And so that exercise won't help with that. I did mention before so like if you have gestational diabetes, you'll have quite a low tolerance to carbohydrates. You'll have to watch your carbohydrate intake. Doing exercise of any sort and having more muscle mass helps you have more of a tolerance, so you get a little bit more wiggle room in that sense. And in general, exercise and weightlifting and having strength, having more muscle mass does give you a little bit more wiggle room with your diet when you know, aesthetically, or in terms of, you know, if you have fat loss goals or fat want to maintain a certain body weight, then it can give you more wiggle room. But and strength training is the long game, you know, like maintaining muscle mass or building muscle mass it helps you maintain a healthy weight over the lifespan. It increases our metabolism, things like that.
Right. Another question. I don't have plans to get pregnant anytime soon, but I do hope to have children in the future. Is there anything I can do now to improve my pregnancy health in the future?
So if you're already, I often get questions from women who are trying to conceive, who think, obviously, the best time to start exercising during pregnancy is before you're pregnant. So if you haven't started exercising and you're pregnant, you should start, like, if you want to, and your doctor says you can. So it is safe to start in pregnancy, but yeah, like having a well-rounded fitness I think is the best, the best plans that you can make. Making sure that you are strong. You don't have to be a power lifter. That's not what's going to help you get through, or like ridiculously strong. That's not what's going to help you get through pregnancy, but having a good level of strength, being able to lift decent weight, but also having good cardiovascular fitness, having good mobility. So if you don't have any sort of mobility routine, or if you're really, really tight, then that's something I'd recommend. But just having that general all-round strength. There's nothing special. I want
to focus on the back or the abdominal muscles, or just overall.
A good mix of both. I mean, like having a strong back and bum and scaffolding, I think trumps good core strength all the time. I know people are obsessed with core strength, but it's really not the be all and end all of everything. And you can have a very decent levels of core strength with very, very little abdominal training. Like I do think most people need a little bit, but it should be sprinkled in to your weekly, a few sets a week, not like like thousands of sets. Also just another thing as well, actually, women who do lift weights, who haven't had babies, especially if you lift very heavy weights, it is a good idea to, often the problem is not a weak pelvic floor. What we're seeing more and more is a hypertonic pelvic floor. Women having too much tension in their pelvic floor and also in their diaphragm, and not being able, the diaphragm and the pelvic floor should work like a piston, and they should relax and contract throughout the breath and throughout movement. And a lot of us who are really into lifting weights, we get really tight in both of those. And so I would recommend noticing any signs of that, like pain with sex, or chest breathing, or very tight hips, or if you have like some women have a little lower belly pooch from lifting lots of weight. That's often a pressure issue. Or frequent urination. It's worth going to a pelvic floor physiotherapist who can check you out and who can release any tight muscles, because those muscles have to be able to stretch. They have to be able to relax during pregnancy and during birth. So that's a big thing I would say to somebody who does want to have kids in the future.
And we have someone else that, and added to that, I'm going through IVF. Anything to help there too?
I would say as long as your doctor allows, it's really important to maintain a good balanced exercise regime. Lifting weights, moderate weights, doing some moderate cardiovascular exercise twice of each a week, doing some mobility work to reduce stress as well as everything else, to do some of what you enjoy. Sometimes doctors don't allow you to do exercise through IVF, or there are certain periods like around implantation and stuff like that you're not allowed to exercise, and that's just doctor's orders. You have to listen to that, but the times that you are allowed to exercise, that it is safe for you to exercise, to maintain that, even if you have to have breaks, like to maintain as much as you can. Well, as much as you can, but also you don't need to go crazy. Like a lot of women over exercise, and it's about having a sensible amount.
One more question. Are there any exercises you recommend for someone suffering from endometriosis?
Oh, good question. So medical issues like endometriosis and PCOS and things like that, like are not my area, my strong point. There's a bit out of my pay grade as a trainer. I think that strength training can help with hormone regulation, those sorts of issues, but I think largely they're medical issues that having a healthy lifestyle. It's not just about exercise; it's about stress and regular patterns and eating healthily and things like that are super duper important. But obviously, lifestyle interventions don't fix everything, and it's a medical issue for the large part.
Okay, so you talk a lot about how you overcame an eating disorder and how you freed yourself from the stressful relationship you had with food. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, how you got over it, and what do you do each day to make sure your mindset doesn't shift back?
So moving on to the heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And this is the stuff that's really relevant to a lot of women as well. So just a little bit about like my background, my history. I grew up with my mum was very overweight. I was in an overweight family, but my mum had very erratic eating behaviors, just classic yo-yo dieter. You know, going on a diet meant, you know, really just eating ridiculously low calories, or doing fad diets that had, you know, really strict rules. And I was, by the time I was preteen, I was very aware of my weight and was uncomfortable with my eating habits. So I sort of jumped on with her in her fad diets, Weight Watchers, Atkins, like whatever, like just and that I just developed that pattern. But for me, that developed into full-blown eating disorders. I mean, for the best part of all my teens, I was it's hard to define. I guess you say I was a binge eater, bulimic. I was basically an anorexic that couldn't hack it. I would like starve myself for like, my goal was to eat nothing, and sometimes I'd get, you know, 3 days in, but then I'd end up binging, and just these insane binges that, like, it's hard to describe. It's hard to even remember what it was like, because I think you sort of go on autopilot, but where I just eat thousands and thousands of calories in a sitting, and it would just go on and on and on and on. And it just never felt full. You never got that full signal. But my hunger signals were so all over the place anyway, because when I was on the diet, you know, I wouldn't feel hungry either. It would just all kind of catch up with me. I kind of went through that through all my teens. Amazingly, nobody seemed to notice. Nobody ever said anything. And it was a pretty tortuous way to live, to be honest. It was really, like I said, I feel so far removed from that now. In terms of what I did to kind of overcome it, I think it happened in stages throughout my life. I think it got a lot better when I moved away from home when I was 18, just being out of that environment and the triggers and just the place where I built those habits. It did get better. I still continued to binge at university, and I picked up some other habits like binge drinking because I was at university in the UK. But it did get better. And then I would say that when I started exercising, like I told you about at the beginning of this conversation, I think it got better again then, because one thing that I think is really important to remember with eating disorders or with any kind of emotional eating, it's not about the food. Like you don't want the food. It's about trying to feel different. It's about trying to achieve a certain emotional state or stop feeling something that you don't want to feel. And so when I started exercising, I started feeling better anyway. You know, it lifted my mood and so that again, it didn't go away completely, but it did get better. When I was 25, I started doing therapy, and that sorted out a lot of, it wasn't directly about eating disorders, but that cleared up a lot of emotional baggage that was leading to some unhealthy eating. And as that got better, you know, it's a slow process, but then it just started to get better. And then I think when I became a trainer, and then I became a nutrition coach, I did a qualification to become a nutrition coach. The more I learned about food, I mean, I even though I had some better habits and stuff, I think I still really thought that, like, you know, carbs are bad for you and sugar's poisonous and like gluten's bad for you, and learning about the physiology and learning about food on a chemical basis, and realizing that all that stuff is really just like, it's just fatty like stuff. There's no truth behind it. And so I started realizing, you know, there's good things in everything I'm eating, and that food isn't bad for me. Food isn't trying to kill me. I think that's like, a lot of people have this like, I shouldn't eat gluten or sugar or dairy or this or that, and everything's bad for me. And so they try and it just constantly feel like, you know, they're doing harm to their body just by eating a normal diet. And it's a very stressful way to live. And I think learning about nutrition and not through some like BS like
Instagram.
not through some BS institution for like holistic health and stuff. It's like for like a real proper like nutrition science. You realize it's not so black and white, and I think that took away a lot of my food fear and made me feel a lot more positive about how I was eating. But I think it's really important to remember that like when it comes to emotional eating, I find that a lot of the advice given is like very Victorian in its approach. It's like, don't think about it, distract yourself, don't have it in the house, just be strong, remember why you want to do it. And it's like, you're not
human.
You're emotional eating, you're doing it because of emotional things that aren't being dealt with. And I don't think you get to not do that hard work. You have to approach the emotional stuff. That's like the overeating is always it's a symptom, it's not the actual problem. And so trying to just deal with the symptom all the time, it's never going to deal with the deeper problems that are causing that symptom.
Do you have any recommendation of like let's say nutrition sources that are like that you trust that we can learn from?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of precision nutrition. They're very based on the science, and there's no woo, you know, it's not and they produce a lot of free articles. That's where I did my qualification, but they produce a lot of free articles, and they really look at the nuance and the pros and cons. They're not short articles, they're like, it really goes into the depth, and you know, talking about like the pros and cons of dairy, for example, rather than just being like, oh, it's bad for you, it's going to kill you. And then on Instagram, there's a couple of really good accounts that I like. I think the best one for like weight loss nutrition is like Jordan Sayat, I would say, like just very like level-headed, like no madness.
Yeah, I also went through so many of these fad diets, and I found that like at some point in my life I was just like scared of all foods, because like every like fad diet is like anti some type of food. So like I tried like Atkins, so like carbs were like the enemy, or like I tried being vegan and like protein was the enemy, and like at the end of the day, after all these diets, like all foods were the enemy. So like it's really like, it took me time to like be like, food is fine, it's not the problem, like need to deal, like you said, with like the emotions that are bringing me to food, and basically like just need to eat like balanced like foods, you know, like have a little bit of everything. Nothing is like not allowed, because when it's not allowed, like you want it more. And yeah, it's a process, definitely.
I think so, but I think that existence of everything being poisonous and everything being bad for you, everything's toxic, that creates so much fear and so much stress in people's lives, and they're living with that every single day. And I think letting go of that fear, that like like a little bit of everything, and everything kind of fitting into a healthy diet. You know, protein's not bad for you. Like carbs aren't bad for you. It's just there's just a range of how much you need. And then even, I'm a big fan of flexible dieting. So you get 80% of your foods from, or 80% of your calorie intake from highly nutritious sources, and then the other 20% is wiggle room to have the stuff that might not be so good for you, but like it's not going to kill you. Like physiology 101, everything is poisonous. It's just a question of dose. If you drink enough water, you're going to die. Like there's really no reason to be scared of certain doses of things, like even having a McDonald's or something. It's not going to kill you.
Fit in that soufgania of Hanukkah, the Hanukkah donut. It's okay.
Even to a weight loss diet, like you can't live off of this stuff, but you can make it 20% of your diet.
So if you could give the community one simple wellness tip that they can implement today to help them along their journey, what would it be?
Oh, this is a really hard one. It's a really hard one, but I would say start small. Start smaller than you think you need to. Like I sometimes have some of my clients start with 1 minute of running, because there's no way they're not going to do 1 minute of running. But when you add a minute every single time, like eventually it gets to a lot, right? And you build a habit in the process. And you can apply that to anything. I'm reading Atomic Habits at the moment, which is every bit as good as the hype. And he talks about that a lot. Like, don't try and overhaul anything. Start with something small and then build on that habit incrementally over time.
Awesome. And okay, we're almost out of time. So any last words of inspiration and motivation for a beautiful and strong community?
Oh, wow, I don't know. Yeah, just like be a human. Like, don't let this take over your life. Like, there are other things as well. It's great to lift weights. It's great to eat healthily. It's great to watch your calorie intake and maintain a certain weight if that's what you want to do. But it's not everything, it's just part of life. So like, don't let it take over everything.
It's okay to fail, right? It's okay I love failing, because then I learn from my mistakes, especially like for me, my struggle now is like around food, and like I'm really like aware now, or like when am I failing, so that I can like understand like what triggers this fail, and maybe to like improve little by little. Yeah.
Exactly. If you're scared of making mistakes, you're never gonna grow or improve in anything. It's really it's a really hard lesson to learn in life. I've been learning it this year. It's been about growing my business and learning that like I am gonna make mistakes. And I've made every mistake possible this past year. Like, I have learned a lot from it. I can only see it in retrospect, but like, yeah, all of these things, like you can't, we all want the way of learning that doesn't involve making the mistakes, but actually like, that's the only way of doing it. Just doing the best you can. Like the Maya Angelou quote, like, do the best you can until you know better, and then do better. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jen. It was really great to talk to you. And I forgot to say that you're like expecting. You said it in the interview, but I wanted to wish you a b'shara tova, that it comes with health for both mommy and baby in the right time.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview. It was fun. I love doing this stuff.
Yeah, I really had fun. Thank you. All right. Thank you for your time, Jen.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.